Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be looking at what is cynicism. Now, cynicism is a philosophical school of thought dating back to ancient Greece that has very little in common with our modern definition of a cynic. Ancient cynics argued for us to throw off social norms and the trappings of civilization and embrace nature and animalistic ways of being. For the cynic, virtue was more important than status, wealth, class, or following the rules of society. This philosophy gave rise to other ideologies, such as Stoicism, and was a precursor to Christianity and cosmopolitanism. Some sources trace the origins of cynicism to Enisthenes, who was a student of Socrates, though there is debate as to whether there's a real link here or there was simply a desire to link cynicism and its successor Stoicism back to the Socratic tradition, as the most famous cynic is Diogenes of Sinope, supposedly a pupil of Enisthenes. No early Cynic writings are extant, so much of what we have about the Cynics comes from Diogenes Laertius, an extravagant source at best, and much of it concerns the antics and activities of Diogenes of Sinope more than his philosophy, though he did try to embody the Cynic lifestyle. Check out our video on Diogenes Laertius if you're curious for him and his impact on philosophy. Diogenes of Sinope, on the other hand, cynicism likely gets its name, meaning dog-like, from the nickname for the most famous cynic, Diogenes of Sinope, who advocated returning to nature, having the self-sufficiency of an animal and the freedom of a god. Diogenes challenged societal conventions in many ways, living outside in a wine tub, publicly masturbating, and ignoring all feelings of human shame like a dog. Diogenes also openly mocked the philosophies and ideas of others, particularly Plato, who he mocked for, among other things, being long-winded and eating too many olives. When Plato called a human a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken and paraded it around, calling it Plato's human. When Alexander the Great asked if he needed anything, Diogenes asked him to get out of his light. While many of his challenges to establish philosophies had merit, he delivered them with the insulting glee of an internet troll. In terms of philosophy, Cynics advocated for self-sufficiency and freedom from societal conventions. They argued for staying in good physical shape to ensure one could be self-sufficient. They argued that class distinctions, civilization, and societal norms were unnatural and bad. They argued that we should admire the animals and the gods which were free from shame or the need for material goods or societal status. For the Cynic, virtue was achieved by acts not by study, by conditioning yourself to live in nature, not by studying books. Happiness for the Cynic was achievable by anyone, regardless of context of social status, since the key to happiness was to throw off this status and return to nature. If the way Cynics argued embodies an internet troll, the way they acted embodies a minimalist survivalist who wants to be completely self-sufficient and free from the rules of society. After Diogenes, the next most famous cynic was Carneades of Thebes, a wealthy landowner who gave up everything to live as a cynic in the footsteps of Diogenes. Carneades was less caustic than Diogenes in his cynicism, being viewed by many as a wise man. However, his rejection of class and societal distinctions was all the more impactful because he willingly gave up his possessions, unlike Diogenes, who, before he was a philosopher, was kicked out of Sinope for literally defacing currency, a phrase which in Greek has a double meaning, also meaning to challenge prevailing political norms, something he did later as a philosopher, making this a hilarious play on words in Greek that the rest of us are confused by. This rejection of class hierarchies by Carneades can be seen in the quote attributed to Carneades: "We should study philosophy until we see in generals nothing but donkey drivers." Carneades married Hipparchia, who, with her brother, also gave up everything and lived in poverty as a cynic. She is credited with being one of the most famous female philosophers of antiquity, challenging social norms around the role of women, arguing she had the right to do philosophy instead of becoming a weaver, and attending events that were reserved for men, much in the Cynic style of rejecting cultural norms. Carneades and Hipparchia were said to have even a marriage that embodied cynical ideals, marrying for love by mutual consent, and lived on equal terms with each other, ideas that were deeply at odds with Greek cultural norms of the time, but well in line with Cynicism's rejection of them. In some ways, Hipparchia might be considered the first feminist philosopher. Other later Cynics included Menippus, who was supposedly a Phoenician slave that bought his freedom through begging and went on to write famous satires of philosophy and religion, and studied and called the Menippean satires through the Renaissance. His satires were studied and called Menippean satires through the Renaissance, to be clear. Other Cynics of this time included Bion of Borysthenes, Tellus, and Cericidas. As Roman emperors banished republican politicians, philosophers preaching Stoic and cynical philosophies were also banished. Cynicism took up a role as an opposition political ideology based around opposition to the hereditary monarchy, in the way that cynics often opposed cultural norms. Groups of people living this cynical lifestyle could be found throughout the Greek-speaking cities of the Roman Empire and along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean from Athens to Alexandria. Demetrius, a friend of Seneca, and Pelagianus were some of the most prominent cynics of the time. Lucian used cynical forms to mock and satirize all things Greek, including cynicism itself. Many later philosophers writing about cynicism denounced some of their contemporary adherents as hypocrites, wealthy politicians preaching the disavowal of materialism and the virtues of poverty, but only in words to appease the poor, leading in part to the negative connotation of cynic now, in that cynic was used to refer to these politicians that were essentially hypocrites, despite the fact that the cynicism itself as a philosophy was not being discarded. The cynics of the time were claiming to be cynics, but in fact using that as a mask for their desire to continue to accumulate wealth. Cynicism had great influence over other philosophies. Stoic ethics are often framed as a cleaned-up version of cynicism, championing virtue as the only good. Jesus and early Christian ascetics were said to be strongly influenced by Cynicism's rejection of class divisions and wealth, as well as the Cynic ideal that a good life is accessible to anyone, even the poor. A claim that makes sense given the popularity of cynicism in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the areas where Jesus and his early followers were existing at the time. Cosmopolitanism also can trace its roots to the Cynic rejection of civilization and any particular governing body, preferring instead to be, quote, a citizen of the cosmos. Now, there are a range of objections one could level at cynicism. One might be concerned with cynicism for any number of reasons. First, it seems there are some practical issues with living as animals do. Diogenes is often attributed to being a proponent of eating raw meat as animals do, and supposedly died from eating uncooked octopus in an attempt to prove that it was safe. Additionally, there are many studies that have found that while over a certain threshold money doesn't buy happiness, having the basic necessities taken care of, food, housing, etc., might make one more happy, and so living to a certain degree in society like humans do might be useful. Finally, one might be worried that cynicism only works in rejection to a society, that cynicism doesn't really have a positive project itself. Cynics lived by begging. If we were all cynics, there would be no one to beg from. There may be something to be said for not feeling shame and for rejecting a lot of the class structures, the gender roles of Greek society at the time. And modern liberal society has taken on many of these aspects of cynicism. But maybe there are some things that are useful. It seems some social conventions, maybe like no public masturbation, probably make more people happy than unhappy. A big thank you to NBA Rudy for their supporting Carneades.org on Patreon since 2018. You too can support the channel and get access to Patreon exclusive posts for just $2 a month, less than the price of buying me a plate of uncooked octopus once a month. If you want to support public philosophy, please do consider donating. What do you think? Should we give up all our possessions and live as cynics? Are there some elements of philosophy that connect with you, of this philosophy that connect with you, and others that don't? It seems that there are some components of cynicism that were deeply at odds with the ancient Greek structures of the time, like living in a marriage that has love in it, or allowing women to do philosophy, that these days we would say, yeah, that's a great rejection. And others where maybe they missed the mark when it comes to public masturbation or living in a wine tub. Are there other components of cynicism you think have virtue? And are there some other components you think we should throw out with the bathwater or the wine tub, as it were? Give me your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.